2022 has been a fascinating year, both geopolitically and economically. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, the rise of Iranian women for freedom and independence, Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, the death of the Queen and Charles's ascension to king, even Trump's announcement that he will run for president in 2024, the collapse of crypto giant FTX to the election of the Albanese government and the re-election of Dan Andrews. So with Christmas approaching, as you can tell by my shirt, and 2022 ending, what better way to wrap up our final program for the year before we return on January the 19th to a bigger and better informer, I know, hard to believe, than chat with our informed team and get their take on what they saw as the top stories for 2022. Welcome, team, and Merry Christmas to all of you. And I want to say before we begin, thank you for your great work this year. It's been one of my favourite times of the week to catch up with all of you and have our chats.
Is it politically correct to say Merry Christmas these days? I sure do.
Yeah. Merry Christmas to those who celebrate, and to those who celebrate whatever else it is.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Noel.
Happy holidays. Let's go USA, shall we?
Yeah, merry holidays. Anyway, have a great time of year, whether it be summer, winter, fall. Actually, summer or winter are the only two options we have. All right, Ryan, so let's kick off with you. Biggest story for you, apart from the obvious, the re-election of Dan Andrews. What do you think some of the things that shaped it?
I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine was the standout event for me. I think it promoted Zelensky as being the champion of the world for a short time. But I say that for a short time because what I find amazing about that event is that everyone had their attention turned to that part of the world for, a couple of weeks, a month maybe, but now it's still ongoing, but kind of no one really talks about it anymore. And I find it amazing that such a period of upheaval in that part of the world, it's still there, but it just doesn't seem on anyone's lips anymore. And I think that's an indictment on us as people, as society, that we tend to move on very quickly when it's not directly affecting us.
It's funny though you mentioned that, Ryan. Sorry, when I say funny, I mean it's telling that now the Ukraine war that we do speak about is its impact on us, the impact on our energy prices, the impact on inflation, the impact. So, as we always say here on the Informer, in a two-horse race, always back self-interest, because at least they're trying. And when you see what they're coming into in winter, and John, you've been there, I would hate to be there in winter.
I've been there too, and it's I've walked through 2 foot of snow in Lviv, so it can be quite harsh. But the outpouring of support for those who are being displaced during that war was just so huge when it was initially happening. I don't think too many people are giving it too much of a second thought now, and I find that disappointing.
And Caroline, what about for you? What was your...
Well, Ryan's stolen my thunder in that regard. I think any war on the world stage is something that I think requires attention. And I believe there's going to be a push to try and unite Western leaders. I don't know how far that will get. And it just shows how mercurial we are as human beings. It does show, that people do move on to the next thing. Having been alive with only one monarch, I would say also that, the death of the Queen was something that I noted. And I also noted the disparate feelings that passing evoked. So it's a different world that she left than the one she came into. And I think my hope is that leadership, regardless of whether you're born to it or whether you ascend to it, can be challenged and can be improved. That's my hope for 2023 and beyond.
What about you, Jack? Our citizen Jack, what was your highlight? Main one.
My highlight is the more pain that we're going to get inflicted by the Dan Andrews government. So we had enough pain for 2 years in terms of what we went through. And I think buckle up, kiddos. I think it's going to get worse next year. Interest rates aren't looking too good for the family income, the disposable income that we've got coming to the table. And I just think it's the tip of the iceberg for all of us. And you know, I'm not a doomsayer. I'm very positive. I think Australians can get up when we need to get up, but I think the writing's on the wall for next year. But on the flip side to that, I mean, it's good that he got back in, because everything he's done up till now, and if it starts falling over, he's got no one else to blame.
I think we're in for a year next year, a very aggressively pushed progressive agenda. He'll want to push through everything that's unpopular very quickly and you know, very forcefully, I would say, in the first year.
Yeah. Cheryl, what about you?
I agree with everyone. But I would like to just take on what Carolyn was saying about the Queen. I think that people who either love the monarchy or don't love the monarchy, I think it impacted nearly everybody. I saw people that had really lost interest, really quite upset by it. But it's not just probably the Queen. I think we've also had some other significant deaths in our sphere, I guess, over the last year. A couple that came to mind was Shane Warne, I think, had a really big impact on Victorians, but not just Victorians, I think around the world. But I know in Victoria, we particularly found it quite hard. And in the political space, I think Kimberley Kitching's early passing, I think also was quite a very sad thing. So I want to just say to the families and friends of those people who are probably doing it really hard this Christmas, that you're loved and you're supported. And it's probably a good reminder for all of us that being around family and friends at this time of year is such a rewarding, and you should really try to, nourish those relationships. So, yeah.
All right, Johnny, let's finish up with you. What were your main stories of the year?
I think what we mentioned about Ukraine is interesting, because what's happened, Ukrainians say this, not forget that 12 million of them have fled Ukraine. And the thing is that they're asking that their situation not be forgotten. And one of the things that we've traveled down that road over the year, where most people thought about that conflict as it impacted on them. So that the wider impacts of energy, inflation, interest rates, all these things did have a large spin-off from the Ukraine war, but they're being forgotten at this particular point in time. As winter comes on, I was talking to some Russians the other day, it was minus 23 in some of the areas that they lived in, and Ukraine. So they're really doing it tough all across the world because of that, but no more so than the 12 million people that have had to flee their homes. And they're largely 12 million is a massive amount, much greater than the Syrian war. But where are they now? If I ask people, do you know where they are? People are not really sure. And that shows you that they're forgotten. So they actually ask that we still remember that conflict. And it's actually settling down to a long trudge, where the death toll on the battlefield is about 500 a day. So let that sink in. And I think that's the real important thing we need to remember.
All right. For me, it's going to be all of the above. But the thing that shocked me was the division that we saw, not only in Australia, but it was worldwide, but especially here in Australia. I remember when we had the fires, the Black Saturdays, the floods, the farmers' droughts, where we would all come together. And, it was a great place to be as an Australian, to see everyone chipping in. But the way that especially this state government encouraged and supported the vilification of people with disparate points of view, and actually used that to push their agenda, I think was probably one of the most reprehensible things that I've seen. And just yesterday, we see Dr. Karen Phelps come out, former MP, former president of the AMA, come out and say that while she was still pushing for vaccine mandates, both her and her partner were suffering severe vaccine injury and was prohibited from speaking out because APRA had threatened with deregistration and even prosecution for any doctors who spoke out about this. Now, if 2022 is going to be remembered for me for anything, that's what it was, because all of that was unnecessary, and all of that was stoked, provoked and fueled by a government with an agenda that had no idea of the consequences or the flow-on effects that they would do. And now we're at the point where we can't either support or criticize the decision based on its merit or otherwise because of who makes it. So it's like, oh, you're just anti-Andrews. Oh, it's just Murdoch media. No, we've just seen our ambulance report again. It's failing. Oh, every state. No.
Well, we have a long history of introducing royal commissions for all manner of different things, particularly when there's been deaths involved. The fact that no government has put up their hand to have a royal commission into this, I just think is crazy. I mean, we need to, if not to point fingers at people who are to blame, then learn the lessons about, making sure that your response doesn't hurt people to the degree that goes beyond the effects of a pandemic. Make sure that when you're pushing vaccines or a certain sort of behaviour, that you're aware of the dangers that are associated with that. I mean, the fact that we're not going into any in-depth investigation of the responses of any government in this country is just, it's unfathomable.
And it's made even more peculiar by the fact that before the pandemic, there was a rehearsal for a pandemic where frontline services were involved and government agencies were involved. You actually have experienced a pandemic. So what's the point of a rehearsal in a thought bubble as opposed to analysing what did we do well, what did we do wrong, what could we do better next time? I agree with you, Ryan. I'm absolutely sitting here gobsmacked that the governments collectively are not pulling this apart and doing that analytical work. I think because they're so worried about fingers being pointed.
Of course they are, yes.
You need to understand again how now Australian governments perform. The other thing coming out of that, Carolyn, is from what I can understand, and this is a real problem, deaths have increased by 13% over the last year.
Mm.
Now, the other thing with that is, how do we know that's a fact? Like, where do you get that information from? It should be the government says this is the case and we need to understand why. It's a massive issue. But the fact is that we don't know. We might read it on social media and it pops up in limited areas of media. And the other thing too, and it's more an amusing thing, Carolyn, that again, if you work for governments, a lot of the funding and something like Family Violence Royal Commission, it goes on plans, consultants, etc. And when it hits the button to implement it, it's all at sea because they never thought they would do it. Everyone's made their money out of generating the documents and bought holiday houses out of it. But as for it actually working, no.
Yeah, and unfortunately that sounds cynical, but it is so true. Having given evidence at the Royal Commission in relation to family violence, I could hear the typewriters in the background. They'd already written it, the plan. They'd already decided what the outcome was going to be. And they did that while they were interviewing potential witnesses to give evidence at the Commission. I agree with you. It's the implementation that they're all scared about getting. I don't think they're scared about getting it wrong because Dan Andrews can explain anything away. I just don't think they have the the determination to see it through.
There's no
or that they're not going to get caught out.
It's not. Their whole role is to just manage risk down to zero.
Yeah.
And, it's.
But when we look at some of the metrics they set, like once we reach 80% vaccination, 90%, so they went for the low-hanging fruit. Let's get everyone vaccinated, and yet the most vulnerable, the disabled, the Indigenous, those at high risk, they weren't the priority. It was just get that number up. And those with the lowest risk were, yeah, look, we did it. How good are we? And we saw some terrible outcomes for those who are marginalised.
Yeah.
But it comes back to for me, a lot of any of this with the mandates and with what Karen Phelps was coming out and saying now is that we threw our process. Like you said, we had our process for a pandemic, we threw it out. We threw out scientific research. We threw it out. We've always done scientific research in a particular way. We threw it out. We don't have a control group. right? Because we threw it out. So all of this stuff where we've just disregarded everything that we've built our society, our processes, everything on in the past has been thrown away. And to reflect on that, or to have them actually admit to that, I think is the biggest fear that they have, because they want to continue to throw things out going forward. So if they reflect on it now on these scenarios, then they can't really do it going forward. So that's why I think there's no Royal Commission, is because they want to keep going down this path, maybe not in these particular spaces, but it'll continue happening in different areas as well.
Yeah.
So
And,
true, Cheryl.
and I'll give you a tip. And Mr. Albanese, if you're listening, you weren't in power at the time. It's another way to really show how bad they were. Get it up, buddy. Like, you know, find not what was wrong, but find what we need to do differently and better next time. Because when it happens again, you know.
And I'd like to know, like John, you said before, you know, the deaths numbers are up, and it's not really going out into, you know, mainstream media. I haven't really seen it on any of those particular platforms. And my real question is this just another sort of building on people's insecurities about mainstream media? Is it building on the insecurities or the worry they have about government? Because why aren't these things at least being discussed? You know, if they're out there, they can be discussed. It could be any particular reason. It could be, if we actually look into it, we build confidence. And all we seem to be doing is, you know, pushing confidence, and everyone more and more is getting dissatisfied with everything that's going on, I think.
On the localized level as well, as I get into my car and avoid all of the potholes and craters on the freeways that haven't been upgraded in 20 years, thinking about which hospital I should go to or not go to a hospital because the health system has collapsed, dropping my son off at a school where, because it's a Catholic school, it's the best of a bad choice, so he doesn't become indoctrinated with something that's an absolute fantasy or a plethora of fantasies. That's the reality that we've sunk to, and it's going in one channel. That's as we go about our daily lives now. As we go down to the supermarket and the basics of can't buy French fries, etc., because there's shortages of, and remember this, when you go to the supermarket, there's about half the items there as there was, say, 2 and 3 years ago. What's happened there? So all of our everyday lives have plummeted, but for no particular reason in that the way that localized our country is managed. But then it's of course global impacts of the war. But even prior to that, the impact of the pandemic and lockdowns was the trigger for this. So we're in a contagion now. As I give up, drive my car home, avoid the latest potholes, and park it and go back and, like everyone else now, switch off and hope it doesn't happen to me.
It's funny, isn't it? Here in Victoria, we've got roads that can't deal with rain and hospitals that can't deal with sick people, and everybody accepts it. You know, it's one thing to identify cause, but surely it's a completely separate thing to have the solution for it.
And now with all that responsibility that's been abrogated, now they wanted to make your electricity supply state owned.
No, thank you.
That's going to be the best show ever.
Yeah.
Shit show? Am I allowed to say that? The other thing about death is, and the numbers of people dying, it's the hidden numbers. So those numbers are hidden, the people who are actually dying as a result of COVID. And then there's the people that missed out on medical treatment because our hospitals were shut, weren't open for business. And that is this, I find that incredibly sad when I'm hearing about people who had something that was manageable, that in a non-pandemic setting could have been saved, and instead they were lost. And I just find that unforgivable as the COVID deaths.
Yeah, and our waiting lists, the way that they're compiled and reported, you're not on a waiting list until you've been referred and seen your specialist and actually on. And I really think we need to rebadge elective surgery to scheduled surgery. Elective surgery is anything that can wait for 24 hours. So apart from emergency surgery, whether it be a fractured skull where they go, right, he's stable, we can wait 2 days, that's elective surgery. really?
Suck it up, remember?
Yeah, but and I think one of the biggest things that's happened over the last couple of years, the attacks on the media, which has been brilliant. I'm sure, John, you'd know, and Mario would be all over this. Attack the messenger and not the message. It used to happen at school. Don't believe him. Don't believe her. She's this, she's that. The media used to be the lower class, not university graduates. We used to be the people who would hold them to account. And there's a beautiful quote in the old Parliament House in the media room that says, news is what they don't want you to print. Anything else apart from that is just advertising. And now this, you can't believe them, you can't believe that. We see the way Andrews manages the media. He doesn't do it. Biggest social media team of all times, and won't answer questions. Then we see people, oh, that's just Murdoch gutter trash. Well, hang on, that was Fairfax. Oh, that's owned by Peter Costello. He's ex-Liberal. Well, who do you think is going to bring you, the truth? Who do you think is going to print something? So
The Informer.
yeah. One, right? What did I think of it?
On that brief, Michael, that in the field I'm operating in, the justice, law and order space, the amount of intimidation and threats level at the media is absolutely incredible. I couldn't, and this goes from a current affair, television news. They're very reluctant to report full stories. Like, their editing is completely different from 2 or 3 years ago. Their editing is, so I don't get in trouble. So the latest thing, the DPP does is not to threaten journalists directly. They threaten their editor with jail time. And I've seen some extraordinary emails come out, particularly from the Office of Public Prosecution, literally threatening journalists and then saying, please write this retraction, please do this. And the retraction is nothing but a bunch of lies. Now that's the government and an authority that prosecutes people doing that. I could show it to you. It is absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah. All right. Well,
can I go one thing, Michael, on what you said, and I'd be keen to know other people's feedback. You said about the emergency. So, a cracked skull could be waiting 2 days. And someone suggested to me that for normal Joe Blow like myself, that would be the case. But there is starting to be a bit of a divide where if you're in the right sphere, if you're in the right party, let's say, as an example, that if you do have that situation, you do become that emergency situation. So this, I don't know if that's happening, I'm not sure, but someone has suggested that may be the case.
We raised in Parliament a woman who had the same injury that our Premier got when he fell down the stairs. He got immediate attention. She's, at the time that we raised her issue, she had been waiting for 2 years with no end in sight.
And if Mario were here, he would say it's communism.
It's a one-party state. That's how.
Or he'd say it's worse than communism because we're clothed in this veneer of democracy when in fact it's a communist state. I'm quoting or channeling Mario when I say that.
All right, so let's make some predictions. Jack, you've sort of given us one already. Something else that you think will or won't happen that's been where people are saying this is going to happen. What do you think is going to fall off the cliff or actually make it through?
From mine personally, maybe Dan Andrews himself fall off the cliff and somebody will save him. Ambulance Victoria will be there holding the hand. Look, in terms of predictions, it's hard. I mean, you can say one thing today, it'll go tomorrow. My message is pretty much everybody stay safe, have a Merry Christmas because we're allowed to say it, and just have a happy season. The rest is just noise.
Yeah. What about you, Sherelle?
I second Jack there, that everyone should try to take this time to have, as much joy around them with their family, with their friends. And I'm not going to predict anything either, but I am going to say that I am optimistic that good people are starting to come together. Like in this year, I've met all of you. So for me, that is a real power, that if I can start meeting more people and we can get good people together, we can actually start making change. So I think we've got to keep optimistic and keep fighting.
Great. Ryan?
I would like to share that optimism too. I guess the only thing I would say is keep an eye on China. There's stuff happening there, and I think there's a lot of saber rattling and the like. And I don't want to be pessimistic on that issue, but I would just say that's where world events are going to emanate from that part of the world.
What about you, John?
Keep an eye on that, picking up on what Ryan said, on that China-Russia axis for perhaps a desperate Russia losing the war to do something really desperate.
And Caroline?
I love the messages of optimism and love and enjoying family, and above all, health. Good health to everybody. You know, without your health, as I found out this year, without your health, you're nothing. It's, you know, having had that awful experience where I lost a faculty or half of a faculty because of Pfizer. It was I was going to say an eye-opener, but I realise that's a very poor pun. But I do have to say the Melbourne Eye were amazing. You know, the fact that you get triaged and you get treated straight away, and that they were able to reverse those effects. But of course, if we had more caution exercised, I probably wouldn't have suffered from the ill effects in the first place. So it's circular. So health, number one.
Yeah, great. Couldn't agree with those positive sentiments anymore. As I say, I love our time together each week having these conversations. It would be great if we could do them in person, but I've got a wispy here, and it's, you might want to get onto Sportsbet about this. Donald Trump is going to flee America in Elon Musk's private jet for sanctuary in North Korea to avoid jail time. So you heard it here on the Informer. Watch it. My main predictions, things that won't happen, SEC. Just won't happen in any way, shape or form as proposed, or even anything like it. The Melton Hospital will still be waiting for anything meaningful in the West. Not going to happen.